Thank you for that. Good morning, folks. It's a great pleasure to have an opportunity to update everyone on the progress and efforts we're making to develop important therapeutics for very debilitating forms of heart disease that affect a broad-ranging age demographic, from acute myocarditis, which remains a leading cause of sudden cardiac death in young people in their 20s and early 30s, to folks with heart failure with respect to the data that we have just announced this morning, where we've shown key impacts on a number of disease processes which underlie the leading cause of death and hospitalization in the world today. So it's with great pleasure that I have a chance to discuss these developments with everyone today. So at Cardiol, we are developing important new therapeutics to address inflammation and fibrosis in heart disease. These are disease processes that are currently not being targeted successfully by any therapeutic available today. And this is a process that we hope to play an important leadership role in. With respect to our clinical pipeline, we now have two phase 2 assets focused on very important conditions, one of which has no standard of care, which is acute myocarditis. I think folks are generally broadly aware of this indication because it has been described as a complication of the COVID virus. It's also been described as a complication of mRNA vaccination strategies. And it's primarily caused by viral infection. So you can think of the influenza virus, now the COVID virus. Certain chemotherapeutic agents used in cancer treatment are causing it. So it's a great medical challenge. It is taking young lives, and it is disrupting quality of life in young people in general. And there's currently no standard of care, and we hope to lead with the first standard of care, which we'll be discussing today. We also have a second important program that is more advanced in development in recurrent pericarditis, where treatment options are typically limited to steroids and more aggressive biological agents, which come at great cost and can have some immunosuppressive side effects, which may limit their use in patients other than the most advanced. We have a strong scientific rationale, which is exemplified by the data that we announced this morning, which is very compelling information with our new sub-Q formulation that we're developing for heart failure. I'll speak more about these data later in the presentation. We have broad intellectual property portfolio now established throughout the world around all of our developments and discoveries. Strong leadership team, advisory panels that I'll describe throughout today's presentation. And we're fortunate to remain in a very solid financial position with our operations funded into 2026. The key features of our pipeline is the recurrent pericarditis and acute myocarditis programs. They're both in phase 2 with recurrent pericarditis positioned to potentially advance to phase 3 as early next year or Q1. And then I'll describe our process for the next drug agent in heart failure based on the interesting data that we presented this morning. We are fortunate to be working with many of the preeminent cardiovascular research centers from around the world. Our recurrent pericarditis program is co-led by the renowned Cleveland and Mayo clinics, and our acute myocarditis program represents a number of preeminent cardiovascular research centers from major regions of the world, including North America, Latin America, as well as Europe and Israel. So we have the foremost experts in these respective areas of medicine collaborating with the company to develop what we believe to be potential new treatment options for patients with these debilitating and life-limiting conditions. Our most advanced program is the Maverick pilot study, which here we're evaluating the clinical effectiveness of our CardiolRx oral drug formulation, which is the lead drug candidate in recurrent pericarditis. This is a very debilitating form of inflammation that affects folks in their prime of life, typically in their 30s and 40s. You get inflammation in the sac around the heart or the sleeve around the heart. Layers within that sleeve can become inflamed and swollen, and you get friction within the layers that can become very painful. Patients typically get relief by sitting up, so they can have to sleep sitting up as an example. They can get severe chest pain requiring pain medications. Some can advance to the requirement for morphines as an example to manage their pain. They have to limit their daily activities in an effort to modify this condition over time. Typical symptoms that lead them for investigation will be shortness of breath, fever, just general fatigue, and very poor quality of life. This condition affects a great number of patients, and there are limited treatment options for those that don't respond to first-line therapy. They can get sent down a path where they either require steroids, which have severe toxicology concerns, or they can become eligible for more potent biological interventions, which come at great cost and potentially have immunosuppressive effects that can increase risk for infection, as an example. At the American Heart Association sessions late last year, we presented very compelling data demonstrating an impact on a number of key markers of this condition, recurrent pericarditis. So these patients have very profoundly elevated interleukin-1. And at multiple dosing levels, we basically attenuated the production of IL-1. So we essentially ablated the production at 10 mg per kilo of our drug agent, which is the known therapeutic dose approved by the FDA for this medicine. But interestingly, at 1/10, 1/100th, and 1/1000th of that dose, we still significantly attenuated the key culprit in the development and progression of recurrent pericarditis. So this was very compelling observation. Another culprit in this condition, as well as other conditions as broad as heart failure, is interleukin-6. And again, as with IL-1 beta, we significantly attenuated the production of this second inflammatory marker. And indeed, we've shown this across many other inflammatory markers, some of which we'll discuss in other sections of the presentation today. But with respect to recurrent pericarditis, I think the most compelling evidence was the impact on two key clinical features. So one feature of this condition is you get a pericardial effusion, where you get fluid around the heart, which increases the pericardial space, or the space between the heart and the sleeve around the heart. We normalize that pericardial space. And the other feature is you get thickening of the pericardium, the layer or the sleeve around the heart. And again, we normalize that pericardial thickness in a very translational model of recurrent pericarditis that has translated for other drug agents, which is important. So we know one of the challenges in drug development is crossing from preclinical models into clinical models. We know this model has been shown to be very translational because other drugs that have worked in this model have gone on to work in humans, although they are limited by their toxicology profile. So the fact that our drug, with an excellent safety profile, has shown to be profoundly effective in this preclinical model, and quite frankly, as effective as other more potent, more immunosuppressive type therapies, we're very encouraged to be now operating our pilot study, which the early signals from which are very encouraging. So these data attracted some of the foremost experts in pericardial disease from around the world to collaborate with Cardiol to speed the development of our medicine. Dr. Alan Klein is heading this study. He is head of most likely the largest pericardial disease center in the world at the Cleveland Clinic. And other advisors include Paul Kramer, who's an imaging expert, Antonio Barte, who's a inflammation and cardiovascular disease expert, where he's one of the foremost experts in that area. Alan Louis would head perhaps the second largest pericardial disease practice in the world at the Mayo. Stefano Toldo did the fundamental work that led to the discovery of the impact of our agent on this well-recognized preclinical model of pericardial disease. And Steve Nichols, as a clinical trialist, was involved in the major study that led to the first biological therapy that was approved for recurrent pericarditis. So we are now completing the Maverick study, the Maverick pilot study. The study is enrolling 25 patients across major cardiac centers in the United States. The primary endpoint here is change in an 11-point numeric pain scale, which is well recognized, used across pain studies of many kinds, including recurrent pericarditis, where it's the marker used to basically demonstrate a patient's having a recurrence. So if they score at a certain level on this marker, they become eligible to enroll in our trial. They then receive 8 weeks of our drug agent administered twice daily, and then they're rescored on the pain scale. And then to the extent that they respond, we then start to withdraw background therapy for a second period of time, typically running 8 weeks, and look for recurrence. And to the extent that we modify recurrence or reduce recurrence, we will use that to plan a phase 3 registrational trial. This is an open label trial. We are getting real-time data. We are very encouraged by the initial observations in the study, and to the extent that they continue, we expect to, or we anticipate being in a position to migrate to a phase 3 program early next year, which will put this company in a very unique positioning from an advanced stage, with having an advanced stage asset in cardiac medicine. In terms of the market opportunity and currently available medications, we see the great opportunity for Cardiol-Rx being a new first-line therapy potentially. So for those patients that don't respond to first line, such as non-steroidals or colchicine, typically the next form of therapy would be steroids, which are used sparingly. Cardiologists try to limit their use because of their toxicology profile. Patients can get steroid dependent, and then the treatment becomes less effective over time. So they need more and more steroids, which creates more and more toxicology. And then it becomes very difficult to get patients off those toxicology-laden medications. And then there is the one FDA-approved therapy, rilonacept, which is a very costly therapy. Even with subsidies, it's typically $150,000 per patient per year. It's typically reserved, it's a great drug, but it's typically reserved for the most advanced patients because it is immunosuppressive. There are risks for infection, and it's very costly to the healthcare system. So what cardiologists are looking for is a new first line or second line therapy, and that's the role we believe we can play and address a very significant percentage of the patient population that either don't have access to the more potent medication or aren't severe enough to warrant it. We're also in parallel running a very important trial in acute myocarditis, which is the Archer trial. This is truly a global effort to develop what we hope to be the first standard of care for acute myocarditis, which remains the leading cause of sudden cardiac death in people under the age of 35. I think everyone has read in the media about a young person that dies suddenly during sport. That is typically this condition, or myocarditis. It does primarily come secondary to a viral infection where a virus invades the heart, the immune system activates to do its job and starts attacking the heart, leading to fibrosis and an inability in the heart to perform properly as a pump. So young, healthy people would feel chest pain or shortness of breath. They would be admitted to a hospital where this would be observed typically on an MRI. So here's a preclinical model of acute myocarditis where you have a viral infiltration into the heart. The immune system activates against it, and the immune system starts to attack the heart cells, leading to fibrosis, which can cause the heart to an impaired function of the heart, or elasticity of the heart is lost. So the heart can't perform its function, which is oxygenating tissue, and that leads to shortness of breath and pain in these patients. Importantly, in this study, the left was normal, healthy heart tissue. The center was disease tissue. On the right, in the presence of the disease induction with concomitant treatment with our drug, you can see the tissue was substantially protected or preserved. This is a very exciting observation, and this is the basis for our landmark trial in acute myocarditis, which is being run, as with recurrent pericarditis, by many of the foremost experts in myocarditis from around the world. This study is co-led by Dennis McNamara and Les Cooper. Dennis McNamara has a prominent cardiac transplantation unit at the University of Pittsburgh, and Les Cooper is the former head of the American Myocarditis Foundation and head of cardiology at the renowned Mayo Clinic. And they're collaborating with other international heart failure specialists from the DeBakey Heart Center, Cleveland Clinic, Ottawa Heart Institute, the Charité in Berlin, San Paulo Cardiac Institute, the Tel Aviv Cardiac Institute, and one of the largest acute myocarditis practices in all of Europe in Paris. This study now represents the largest placebo-controlled randomized study ever conducted by a company in acute myocarditis since the steroid studies back in the 90s, which proved to not be effective at that time. So we now have over 35 centers enrolling patients. The primary endpoint here is imaging. So patients are imaged on a cardiac MRI. Basically, we image all that material I showed you on the previous slide. Patients then receive 3 months of treatment, and then we re-image. And we're measuring very high precision measures of cardiac performance, extracellular volume, which is all of that material that you saw, the scarring outside of the heart cells, and then the cardiac performance, which includes ejection fraction. The study is progressing very well. It's in fact accelerating, and we've recently announced that we anticipate completing this trial ahead of schedule as early Q3 next year. And then with respect to the market opportunity, it's essentially an open landscape because there are currently no FDA-approved therapies for myocarditis. And this is a devastating condition that takes young lives and is very costly to care for. A typical hospitalization that may involve the ICU can run over $100,000 per week. So there's a tremendous opportunity to protect the heart during the dangerous, persistent phase of this condition, allowing these young, healthy people to fully recover and go on to lead perfectly normal lives. That's our ambition at Cardiol, and that's where we plan to play a role. So that's where we're at with the lead programs, the first of which we plan to progress to phase 3 early next year, followed by myocarditis, which we anticipate completing that study in Q3 and having top-line data in the second half of 2024, which we potentially believe will lead to a second phase 3 cardiac asset. But we also have a very important innovation, which is a new novel subcutaneous form of this medicine. So we will be delivered similar to insulin. Many new drug agents in the cardiac setting, in the autoimmune disease setting, are being delivered subcutaneously to allow for a more efficient way for the drug to depot and be dispersed to sites of disease. In the case of cardiac, we believe it offers the potential for a treatment administration schedule as efficient as once per month to deliver the drug efficiently to the heart. And we have ambitions to address this to the mass market of heart failure, which is arguably one of the greatest medical challenges facing the developed world today, second only to probably diabetes in terms of its size and scope and impact on human health. At any one time, there's 3.3 million hospitalization visits in the United States. There's more hospitalization visits associated with heart failure than any other condition. And a diagnosis of heart failure foretells a very high mortality risk at 53% within 5 years, making the mortality similar to that of many forms of other advanced disease, including cancers. There are essentially 2 types of heart failure which challenge folks in their advanced age set. One is systolic, where you get a pumping dysfunction in the heart. And we've seen many treatments develop to assist with that type of heart failure. But the other 50% approximate of the heart failure population is affected by diastolic heart failure, where in fact the pumping action of the heart is preserved. It's relatively normal, but the filling action of the heart is impaired because of fibrous thickening in the ventricle muscle. So the heart doesn't relax, therefore it doesn't fill properly. So simplistic terms, one is a pump problem, one is a partially empty pump problem. And it's this diastolic heart failure opportunity, or heart failure preserved ejection fraction, that our data is suggesting we can play a significant role in. We have just presented very compelling data at the Heart Failure Society of America meeting, and we're using here a model that is designed to mirror the key culprits in the development of diastolic heart failure, which is basically a combination of obesity and metabolic syndromes such as diabetes, as well as hypertension. So these, in this preclinical model system, fat induces, or a high-fat diet induces these challenges. And interestingly, our lead drug agent administered subcutaneously, which is, we believe, will be a first-in-class way to deliver this medicine, was associated with reduction in body weight gain. We prevented multiple markers of inflammation, which are implicated in this condition, such as IL-6 and IL-1 beta, which I showed you previously with respect to recurrent pericarditis. But we also reduced IL-10, which when it's elevated, it can promote fibrosis. as well as tumor necrosis factor, which has been studied across a broad range of inflammatory conditions and is very impactful, certainly in the autoimmune complexes. We also reduce cardiac remodeling, as evidenced by impact on brain natriuretic peptide, which is elevated in many folks with heart failure, and TGF-beta, which is a pro-fibrotic mechanism. And perhaps the most exciting observation was the reduction of visceral adipose tissue to subcutaneous adipose tissue index. So visceral fat is a more dangerous type of fat that typically envelops around organs. And interestingly, in response to a high-fat diet, you get an elevated deposition of this dangerous fat, where in the presence of the drug-treated group with Cardiol's lead subcutaneous drug agent, we significantly reduced the development of this visceral fat tissue, which we believe is a very exciting observation and can lead us to help many patients potentially suffering from heart failure, which involves millions of patients around the world. Importantly, these data that we presented or announced this morning are also consistent with previous data in a model of HFrEF, or heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, where again, we modify BNP and we reduce the fibrotic lesions that develop in the heart that impair its ability to function. So the major milestones for this organization that we're very excited to be on path to achieving in the second half of this year and early 2024 is we believe we'll complete 50% enrollment in the recurrent pericarditis study imminently, and we look forward to announcing that in the very near future. This will be followed by interim analysis, completion of 100% enrollment, and then we anticipate, based on the early observations in this study, that we will then be positioned in Q1 to migrate to a phase 3 program, which is typically the level of development that attracts strong interest from the pharmaceutical industry that we're in discussion with currently. We also anticipate completing the acute myocarditis program ahead of schedule, as previously announced about 2-3 weeks ago, where that trial is now accelerating. We anticipate completing enrollment in that trial as early Q3, and that will position us for top-line data in the second half of 2024 and potentially lead to a second phase 3 program within the 2024 calendar year. And then, based on the data just presented over the weekend at the Heart Failure Society of America meeting, we plan to speed the development of our new subcutaneous form of our lead drug agent, targeting a marketplace potentially as large as diastolic heart failure, which, as mentioned, represents the leading cause of death and hospitalization in the developed world, and is probably one of the greatest medical challenges that face very high population centers of the developed world. Management team, just in the interests of time, I'll be very brief. We have a team here that has over 30 years expertise in developing treatments for heart disease. I've worked in heart failure medicine for over 30 years. Dr. Andrew Hammer joined us over 2.5 years ago. He was formerly head of the cardiometabolic program for Amgen, which is their largest program at the time. He also ran over 40 multi-center clinical trials during his 10 years practice as a heart failure specialist. Very distinguished financial officer, operating officers, clinical operations, business development, and regulatory expertise. I would welcome everyone to visit cardiolrx.com and view the biographies on this very distinguished, accomplished team of management. Our board is international. It brings tremendous breadth of talent across many disciplines. Our chair is widely recognized immunologist, cardiologist, heart failure specialist, and runs one of the largest private research networks in the world today, as well as remains a practicing cardiologist. We have great Wall Street experience with Jen Chow, pharmacology expertise with Colin Stote, who developed one of the first medicine to be approved by the FDA, which was our drug in another indication. After 18 years, chose to join our board to help us with our development efforts. Terry Luxem, a veteran of the pharmaceutical industry, as is Peter Picos, and Mike Wilner brings great expertise on the business side and legal side. Our scientific advisory panel is chaired by the renowned Paul Redker, who's widely recognized as one of the foremost experts with respect to the role of cardiac inflammation in the development and risk for mortality. Basically, Paul's work discovered the relationship between C-reactive protein and high risk of cardiovascular mortality, and now advises many of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And we're thrilled to have him on our panel advising us as well. Bruce McManus has studied inflammation and heart disease for many, many years and is recognized as an expert in acute myocarditis, which is our largest clinical program at present. And Dr. Joe Hill is well recognized as one of the foremost experts in diastolic heart failure. He actually developed the model that we just presented data on at the Heart Failure Society of America meeting. And he's also the editor-in-chief of the prestigious journal Circulation for the American Heart Association. So that's Cardiol, update on Cardiol. We're very excited. We have a strong back half of this year, progressing 2 phase 3 programs, migrating the lead program. We hope to phase 3 as early as Q1. Strong financial position, extraordinary team of management advisors. Intellectual property continues to be fortified around the world, and we are capitalized into 2026. So we're very fortunate to be in a strong financial position to execute across all our strategies.
David, thank you very much. We still have 2 more minutes for a few questions, so let's dive right in. The first one is, can you speak again about today's positive news release and the study results?
Certainly. So the key impacts today was this model of diastolic heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is basically induced with similar processes that lead to induction of this disease in people with heart failure, which is a combination of obesity, metabolic syndrome, as well as hypertension. That's what makes the model so relevant and so important, as our chief medical officer mentioned in our press release this morning. But the remarkable findings from this study was the impacts of our drug across multiple markers of inflammation and the key marker reducing the deposition of this more dangerous fat, which is visceral fat, which is a key culprit in increasing cardiovascular risk in general and heart failure in particular. And then the markers of fibrosis are entirely consistent with our previous work. So here we're showing key impacts on essentially the leading cause of death, and certainly leading cause of hospital admissions throughout the developed world, a condition that costs the US healthcare system over $30 billion annually. So we believe this is a very exciting innovation, and we now look forward to speeding the path for the development of this new innovative drug formulation and addressing it to one of the largest medical challenges in the world today.
That sounds fantastic. And sadly, we just ran out of time. So thank you again.
Okay. Thank you for inviting us to your conference. It was a great pleasure to participate.